The Human Trafficker and His College Sex Cult. Welcome to Sabrina Loves Justice. We fight modern slavery and pursue freedom and justice for all. You're in the right place if you want to hear true stories about human trafficking and learn from the experience. Today, we'll hear a true story of a father who trafficked his daughter's college friends and started a cult on campus. There is no better way to understand the horrors of this crime than listening to the stories of those who have personally lived it. We can learn from these stories and become stronger in the fight against modern slavery. So please click the subscribe button and ring that notification bell. A warning, this true story contains some material that may come across as graphic. Our story starts at St. Lawrence College in New York State. There is a misconception that human trafficking is a foreign problem and that victims are transported from other countries. That does happen, but every state in our union has reported human trafficking, and today's story is from New York. By definition, human trafficking is a crime involving the exploitation of a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. Lawrence, or Larry Ray, aka Larry Greco, is a human trafficker. Modern slavery is always about control and money, and Larry Ray gained control of his own daughter's friends by moving into her college dormitory. He then used therapy sessions to groom her friends and ultimately exploit them to make over $1 million.
This morning, a 60-year-old father is behind bars, indicted by federal authorities for alleged sex trafficking and abuse of college students, including some of his daughter's roommates. According to the indictment, Lawrence Ray moved into his daughter's on-campus housing at the prestigious Sarah Lawrence College in 2010. Prosecutors say he befriended her roommates, some still teenagers, and began therapy sessions with them.
The predator moved into his daughter's college dormitory. I have questions. First, about the dorm room situation at the prestigious Sarah Lawrence College, just north of New York City. It's a 2-story brick dorm in the middle of campus. Of course, there are co-ed dorms, and I know it's been a minute since I was in a dorm, but we had strict policies about only housing students. No civilians allowed. You had to be enrolled at university to stay in student housing. Thus the name, student housing. So I don't know about the rules of Sarah Lawrence College. By the way, it's just weird that it's Sarah Lawrence College and the predator's name is Lawrence Ray. Weird. We do know how Lawrence came to live in his daughter's dorm room with her roommates. It's a juicy backstory, and we'll be able to spot all the signs of a predator working for control. These were bright young students. Some of his victims gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars from their parents' bank accounts. They opened lines of credit, and they borrowed from friends, family, and their employers. Can you imagine having to ask your kid, hey, honey, you withdrew a large amount of money from our checking account, and I'm going to need to know where the money went. And opening lines of credit. It's hard to come back from an abused credit line. Your score drops and it takes years. Bad credit is no joke. And then he had his victims asking their friends and family for money to give to him. Tentacles everywhere. Sex trafficking is about 2 things that go hand in hand: control and money. As we walk through this story, we'll see signs of control and money at every turn. Lawrence Ray, who sexually, psychologically, and emotionally manipulated his daughter's classmates at Sarah Lawrence College, was just sentenced in January of 2023 to 6 decades in prison by a federal judge in Manhattan who called Ray's conduct sadism, pure and simple. 63-year-old Lawrence Ray of Piscataway, New Jersey, was sentenced for years-long predatory crimes against students at Sarah Lawrence College. In one instance, prosecutors said that Ray sexually groomed this victim and collected sexually explicit photographs and other personal information, which he used to continually engage in commercial sex acts. He made millions, that's plural, of dollars from his victims in the form of forced prostitution. He used his own daughter. So let's go back to the beginning and answer the how. How did this happen? Back in 2010, if you talked to Ray's daughter, Talia Ray, a true Jersey girl, she would have glowing things to say about her daddy. She told her girlfriends that her dad was above all things a trustworthy man who had gone to prison, protecting her from her crazy, abusive mother, and he was only in prison due to a government conspiracy. She loved her father, and daddy was getting out of prison and needed a place to crash for a while. So, hey, roommates, how about he stays here in our college dorm? And her roommates were, so he moved in. Sarah Lawrence College, just an hour north of New York City, looks like a set for a British midsummer murder. Sarah Lawrence College was full of Gentile students and staff, and they didn't have security problems. When asked about security issues at Lawrence, the school's head of security reported that he once had to send out a safety alert because a small fox was spotted on campus, but no monsters to date. Like most liberal arts colleges, the students felt sheltered, which made them the opposite of street savvy. It made them vulnerable. Young adults away from home for the first time, and a secret agent man, Marine, comes along and listens to all of your questions, and he has all the answers. He spotted easy targets. These kids were brainiacs, introverts, artists, one might say bookish. The school's actual slogan was, "We're different, so are you." They were emos in the sense that they were emotional and sensitive and searching. Talia's roommates were Daniel, who was a little out of sorts right out of the gate because he had just begun exploring his sexuality. Freshman Claudia Isabella Pollock, who became Larry's top lieutenant, and Santos, who later was persuaded to recruit both of his sisters into the house. There may have been more, but these are the students who made the news. Larry takes control as soon as Larry moved into the dorm. He started taking control of the house. He would hold court in the middle of the dorm and have everyone gather round for his wisdom. He had the influence of money. How did Larry have money coming out of prison? He had a long rap sheet of securities fraud and had previously been indicted on a pump and dump security scheme that was linked to organized crime. He had dirty money, and he bought his daughter and these 7 starving students with steak dinners and expensive takeout. Food is a big influencer in who is in control. So while they ate, he went to work on more control. He talked with a nasally Brooklyn accent,
Brooklyn's a little
and he
more
sounded
tough.
like an authority on everything. Talia knew his stories, and that's why she thought her father's imprisonment was a government conspiracy. He would tell the kids about his supposed long and decorated history as a government agent. He told them he had been an international CIA operative, that he had personally engineered a ceasefire in Kosovo and recovered Stinger missiles off the black market to boot. And he would preach the values of the Marine Corps. These are great values if you're an honorable soldier. Larry talked about his relationships with high-ranking officials and military officers, and the kids ate it up. Because if he had been a trustworthy man, that would have been some really cool stuff. Larry wasn't really handsome and not exactly ugly, and he was short for his weight, but he was in some way intimidating. Shiny shaven head, tight polo shirts a size too small, collar flipped up. He's at a liberal arts campus asking people, "Hey, you work out? You need to. Someone's going to kick sand in your face. You got to work out."
Just like that. Did I get bigger yet? How about now?
He could be charming. Larry, not Polly. I don't know about Polly. Seems charming. Larry was an expert groomer. A groomer is someone who builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or young person so they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. He was a good listener when really all a kid needs when they're in college is someone to listen. He actually lectured them on, get this, truth and justice. They ate it up. The kids were in different stages of uncertainty in life, and Ray was expert at identifying weaknesses and exploiting them for his benefit. Dan was vulnerable because he was being encouraged to question his sexuality. Two of the student roommates struggled with depression. The girls in the house had their own vulnerabilities. One girl went through a bad breakup right after Larry moved in, and he pounced. He became the comforter of the brokenhearted. He ingratiated himself to the kids by taking on all of the cleaning. He played daddy. He took on the role as alpha male. He became their professor of philosophy and screened Carl Sagan's movies, Cosmos. He set up a movie in the common room, sleeping bags and pillows all over the floor, and wise old Larry enlightened the student body on the nature of the universe. Then he'd sleep on the couch or in his daughter's room on an air mattress. It sounds weird that a dad was living in a student dorm, but they were still having parties and even building a beach in the kitchen, typical dorm life, and nobody complained about Larry. So Larry was free to launch his big idea. He had everyone's vulnerability nailed down. He had their trust. He put himself in a position of authority. And now it was time to execute the evil plan. He became their therapist. As part of his sexual grooming, he wanted to get completely in a kid's head. He had them confess their deepest, darkest secrets and ultimately used those secrets as ammunition to get his way or take them down. He'd get someone into a counseling session and tell them that fate brought them together in that house because they all had a shared obsession, an obsession he put in their head, an obsession to take their own lives. But he could save them. He had mad skills, after all, skills he picked up from the CIA, and he could use those tactics to help them. And in this way, he came to have control, manipulating those feelings of hopelessness. He identified his targets. The broken-hearted girl in the house was Isabella. Isabella was a rock star, big brain, full academic scholarship from an all-girls Catholic high school. She went through a bad breakup right as Larry was getting his hooks into the house. Isabella later shared that she took comfort in Larry's company. She said, "I'm 19 and I was having a lot of difficulty making sense of things. I wasn't in a good place. He started to help me kind of process and make sense of a lot of things I just couldn't make sense of." Isabella was in a fragile state, and in fact, several people in that house were vulnerable, perfect hunting ground for a predator. One of the roommates remembers seeing Larry and Isabella reclining on a bed. Larry was playing the trustworthy confidant, stroking Isabella's hair and comforting her. He'd say, "Nobody's going to hurt my baby girl. Nobody's going to hurt my baby girl." And soon, Larry announced that he was going to start sleeping in Isabella's room, which made Isabella's boyfriend a bit uncomfortable. But Larry would mock their concerns. "You're acting like I'm going to be sleeping with her, but I'm going to be sleeping on the floor. She needs someone to help her." Here's Larry Ray's idea of helping Isabella. That winter, the night before Isabella was headed to her family home for winter break, Larry called her house and spoke directly with her family. According to Isabella's aunt, Larry told Isabella's mother that she had been sexually abused as a child by a family friend. Now, this wasn't something that Isabella had ever mentioned or that anyone had ever suspected or talked about before. But Larry insisted that if Isabella were to go home for break, she would probably commit suicide. Isabella's mother was freaked out. She and her daughter were tight, and nothing had ever been mentioned of an assault. So Larry pressed in. "You let this happen to her." Isabella spent winter break hunkered down with Larry and a couple of the other roommates in a one-bedroom condo on East 93rd Street, owned by Lee Chin. And Chin, an old friend of Larry's, stayed with them. Isabella and Larry shared the bedroom. At this point, Larry was controlling every aspect of the lives of anyone in his domain. He held mandatory dinners and family meetings. He controlled when they ate, what they did, and even what time they went to bed. On more than one occasion, Larry would call a family meeting and preached to the kids on Q4P, which ironically is a major philosophical study which systematically confronts the problem of evil. He was convincing enough and had enough control that he was able to dictate to one of the guys that they should stop taking their prescribed antipsychotic medication. One roommate, Claudia, bought into everything Larry was selling and started having weekly counseling sessions with him. Claudia was a sweet introvert. She wasn't a partier. In high school, she belonged to a tight group of girlfriends who would spend their weekends taking selfies, gossiping about boys, and writing poems. She was known for being super smart and creative and a great storyteller, and she never let the truth get in the way of a good story. She'd tell little lies to make herself look cooler, like claiming to love a band she had never heard before. And once she faked a fainting spell in Spanish class just for attention. Initially, Claudia didn't quite trust Larry and felt intimidated by him, but he kept working on her, and over time, she fell under his spell and started meeting with him in private. As a result of Larry's influence, Claudia started turning inward. She had once been a funny girl, but she lost her sense of humor and had to fake pleasantries with people. Larry talked so much about his time as a Marine, and Claudia was so impressed by his stories that she started posting about the Marines on her own Facebook wall. She confided to some close friends that she thought she might be schizophrenic because Larry, who had no medical training, had diagnosed her during one of their therapy sessions. Demoralization of a victim is a common predator tactic. Tear your target down so only you can build them back up. Claudia's friends had commented that Larry's amateur mental health counseling seemed weird and potentially harmful because they felt that Claudia definitely had some complex issues and real stuff going on, stuff that a licensed therapist should be handling with her. But Larry claimed to have some superhuman level of empathy or ability to talk to young people and help them work through their issues. Larry started working on controlling Daniel, the one questioning his sexuality. Everyone encouraged him to talk to Larry because that's where they were going for answers. So Daniel and Larry met in a coffee shop one afternoon, and Larry had him sucked in for hours. His advice? Dump your girlfriend. Dan later said, I was directionless, and suddenly this real man came into my life. It was this incredible feeling of such intense validation, of being seen and heard finally. Larry offered to help Daniel achieve clarity. After this marathon coffee shop therapy session, Larry had arranged for the roommates to be waiting for them outside in a limousine. They all drove to the apartment on East 93rd Street, where Sarah Lawrence students were being housed, and Larry suggested Daniel live there for the summer with him and some of the other students. He agreed. Daniel said that he just didn't want to admit failure and go back home to his parents. And he says, part of why I got in a cult at all was because I had no idea how one finds a place to live in New York. Now that's our first reference to calling this arrangement a cult. So let's talk about cult behaviors. Larry created a cult. The definition of a cult is a system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure or object or a relatively small group of people having beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. This is how Lawrence Ray became a cult leader of the kids in that New York apartment over the summer.
Expect to become polygamous gods in the celestial kingdom, rule over other planets, and spawn new
To be continued. Thank you for joining us to fight evil. You can subscribe below and pick up the rest of this story next time at Sabrina Loves Justice. To be continued. Thank you for joining us to fight evil. You can subscribe below and pick up the rest of this story next time at Sabrina Loves Justice.